Hi, everybody. Al Bernstein here with another one of our quick hit videos, part of our Boxing Hangout series. And on this one, we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the great match between Marvin Hagler, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Tommy Hearns on April 15th, 1985. It was called simply The Fight. And I was privileged to announce this at Caesar's Palace, those iconic posters of the fight. And yes, the man I worked with at ringside, Al Michaels, who now is back doing boxing, but at that time had done just a little bit of boxing, but was put onto this special broadcast. And another iconic broadcaster worked with us on that telecast, and that was Kurt Gowdy, who hosted the show. But Al Michaels and I were ringside for what turned out to be one of the most amazing evenings of middleweight boxing in the outdoor stadium at Caesar's Palace. Now, this was a fascinating fight on many levels. Of course, Tommy Hearns had previously lost to Sugar Ray Leonard, his only loss as a professional. Marvin Hagler was the middleweight champion and had been middleweight champion for a while and had made a number of defenses of his title and was heading toward what then was the record by Carlos Monzon of defenses in the middleweight division when he took on Tommy Hearns, who had moved up to the middleweight division. What they produced that night was extraordinary. Now, the crowd at that fight, leading into it, there was an amazing buzz that evening. I remember talking to Bruce Trampler, the matchmaker for Top Rank, even before we went on the air, much earlier than the main event. And I said to him, there's a buzz at this outdoor arena that I have not seen, even for other great fights like this in the 1980s. And I was privileged to do a number of them. I had done the Marvin Hagler-Roberto Duran fight prior to this. And of course, that was an extraordinary evening. So there was this sense of anticipation of something special happening that evening. Did something special happen? You bet. It started right in the very first round. Marvin Hagler came out very aggressive, trying to get to Tommy Hearns immediately, more aggressive than anyone thought he would come out. And in round one, he ran into a right hand by Tommy Hearns that really hurt him. And on the broadcast, we thought, wow, Marvin Hagler, who is never stunned, was stunned in the fight. And it was uppercuts like this right hand, in addition to the straight right that hit him, that made us believe that Tommy Hearns' power punching was having an impact on Marvin Hagler. Well, they produced a round one that was so extraordinary. At the end of the round, and I'm not giving a hyperbole, as most of you know if you watch my work, I said, this is probably one of the greatest rounds in middleweight history. And my broadcast partner that night, Al Michaels, also made a very apt comment when he said, it's as if we've watched a whole fight in one round. Well, at that moment, we started, when we're getting ready to start round two, I think everybody out there in that outdoor arena had the feeling that whatever we were going to see from then on in, it was not going to go the distance. This fight would end before the limit. Round two was almost as exciting as round one. Great attacking by Hagler, throwing both punches to the body and the head, and then Tommy Hearns throwing counter punches, those uppercuts like we've seen, and straight right hands, and landing punches that, by the way, in my opinion, would have knocked down most fighters. That night, it barely slowed Marvin Hagler down. And Tommy Hearns would later talk about the fact that the first right hand he threw that presumably stunned Hagler, in that punch, he had actually hurt his right hand. But he kept throwing it throughout this fight. Finally, when we got to round three, a seminal moment in the fight came when referee Richard Steele took Marvin Hagler over to the ringside physician, Dr. Donald Romeo, because Hagler had several terrible cuts, all by punches, mind you, no clashes of heads to show that he had taken a lot of punishments from Tommy Hearns. And there was a danger that this fight would be stopped. And Hagler would say later that that was the moment when he knew he had to get Tommy Hearns out of there, because if that fight had gone even one more round, there was the possibility that Hagler could have lost as a result of cuts. Instead, an avalanche of punches produced that moment, a stoppage of the fight, Hagler landed a number of good punches, including a final straight right hand, and the fight was stopped by Richard Steele. In the aftermath, the images of this fight were extraordinary, none more extraordinary than this, an iconic photo in which one of the Hearns camp literally picked Tommy up and carried him to the corner. Now, this is a scene we would never see repeated today, but then it happened, and it made Hearns look even more vulnerable, but it reminded us that this man, Marvin Hagler, marvelous Marvin Hagler, had done something truly amazing. Now, the performances of both men in this fight were better than great. For Marvin Hagler, it cemented in history his position as one of the great fighters. And as he moved on in his life, yes, he had the loss to Sugar Ray Leonard after this fight, which many people believe could easily have been a win for him. I would have scored him the winner in that fight. Moved to Italy, did some movies, created for himself a life that has been a superb life. He's when I'm around Marvin, from that moment on, when he retired, he was very comfortable in his own skin. He was put into the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1993, and well-deserved, of course, and he's one of the great middleweights. In fact, one of the great fighters of all time. As for Tommy Hearns, he continued his career, had a brilliant career after that in both the middleweight division, won a light heavyweight championship, and fought many iconic fights after that. And because he retired much later, it was 2012 when he was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. I'm not sure who that guy is standing on his left, but it was actually a very wonderful year, and I was honored to go into the Boxing Hall of Fame the same year as the great Tommy Hearns. There are very few men, if any, who you could say represent how special boxers are, that would be more appropriate to give that label to than Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler. They are two men who absolutely define how special boxers are as athletes. And that evening is one that I will never forget. It's frozen in my memory. And Dan Parks, our producer for the Boxing Hangouts, I'm going to bring you in right now because you as a fan, you of course watched that fight, and it creates these lasting memories, doesn't it?
Absolutely, Al. It's been, 30 years. I've seen that fight a zillion times since that time. And, I wanted to ask you a question because I saw the tape again, and something that I saw that I had never heard of before had to do with Tommy Hearns getting a massage before the fight. Did you hear anything about that ringside or before or after the press conference? Anything about that?
There was nothing prior to or right after, but Emanuel Stewart, sometime later, said, I think at that time they didn't want to act like they were making excuses, but Manny Stewart has said many times since then that some member of the Hearns entourage, and it was a big one, without him knowing about it, had gone and massaged Tommy's legs that day as if they were relaxing. But of course, you really don't want to massage someone's legs. You don't want them to be relaxed. And Tommy always had an issue with leg strength and sometimes having problems a little bit with his mobility, but he could move, and he was a great boxer, of course. We saw it in the Leonard fight. But especially as he put on more bulk in his upper body, sometimes that was an issue. But in this fight, it was certainly an issue. And Manny, of course, is one of the great people in boxing and was my longtime friend and a mentor in many ways. He claimed always that was an issue, and that he felt that contributed to the issues Hearns had in terms of his movement in that fight. In any case, it was an extraordinary evening of boxing, and 30 years later, it still resonates. And Marvin Hagler, in the post-fight interview that he did with me, said at one point, he uttered a rhetorical question. So what do you think? You think everybody got their money's worth? My answer to that question is simple. We're 30 years later, and we're still getting our money's worth from this fight. And we wanted to remember it on the 30th anniversary of Hagler Hearns. I doubt that there will ever be a fight that will create as much action within such a short period of time as that fight did. And for as long as there's boxing, for as long as there are sports fans that want to look back at the sport, the fight will certainly be one that they remember forever.